Everybody loves a great big series, especially in the fantasy and sci-fi community. But some of the books that have impacted me the most have been standalones. And so that's what I want to talk about today. My 10 favorite standalone novels of all time across a few different genres: fantasy, sci-fi, literary fiction, and horror. And I want to talk about why they impacted me so much and why they make my top 10 list. So let's get started. What's going on, guys? Preacher Reads here, and I'm excited to talk to you guys about my favorite standalones. And before we dive into the top 10, let's do a few honorable mentions. The first one I want to talk about is Ronald Malfi's Blackmouth. Now, why is this an honorable mention? It's an honorable mention because even though I think Ronald Malfi is one of the best writers in horror currently, and this is his best published book, I didn't feel like this book impacted me quite as much as the others on the list, didn't quite make me think as much, didn't quite stick with me for as long. And Malfi is known for taking some common horror tropes, putting his own spin on them, but in a way, they are a little safe. And I think that my top 10 list just includes some books that really stuck with me longer than this one, even though this is one of the best horror books I've read in quite a while. Next up, an honorable mention that definitely cracks the list, and maybe 2 years ago would have been on my top 10, and that is A Man Called Ove by Frederick Bachman. This book broke me. The conversation that is happening in this book is so important, it is so vital, and is done so well. And I think this probably would be 11 or 12 on my list. Just doesn't have the emotional staying power that the top 10 do. And that's saying something because this has emotional staying power. It's just right there. I couldn't even really give you a reason why, any critique on this book. It is extremely well done. It's well written. The characters are hauntingly beautiful. There's whimsy to it, even in the midst of dealing with this really difficult subject matter. This is one of the best books to deal with grief and loss that I have ever read, and it's just outside my top 10. And next up on my honorable mentions is the one and the only House of Leaves. This is one of the greatest experiences that I've ever had when reading a book, but I do think that it falls short of my top 10 favorite standalones for a couple reasons. And the main one being, you're going to find in my top 10 that the common denominator is emotional impact and making me deal with and consider things in real life. And while House of Leaves is an absolute masterpiece and accomplishes something that almost no book I've ever read has ever accomplished, and maybe no book I've ever read has accomplished, I don't think it accomplishes that. I don't think it engages themes and makes me feel things the way that my top 10 does. But House of Leaves is still one of my favorite books of all time. And last but not least on my honorable mentions are going to be two books by Stephen King. And that's because I'm only including one book per author, and my top 3 Stephen King books shift every 3 months. It's really difficult for me to decide between these top 3. And I've made a decision, and I've placed my favorite right now into the top 10, but the other 2 at least deserve a shout out. First up is The Chunky Boy, The Stand. What do I need to say about this? If you are a King fan at all, or just somebody who is in horror fiction at all, you know about The Stand. You know The Stand is well beloved, and it's well beloved for a reason. I love his engagement with good and evil. I love the massive scope of the characters and how everything comes together at the end. And hot take, I actually think the ending is perfect. And I know that that's probably controversial, but The Stand sometimes feels like my favorite King book. Not right now, but it's definitely in my top 3, and it's just outside of this list. The other Stephen King book that is sometimes my favorite and kind of waffles back and forth is 11/22/63. Now, this is the first Stephen King book I ever read when I wasn't reading much and I was bored at the beach, and my girlfriend, who is now my wife, spent way too much time tanning on the beach, and I just kind of sat there and fiddled my thumbs. I decided to go to the store and buy a book, even though I wasn't really reading much, and I'd never read King, and this is what I picked up. It had just released, and it was amazing. This is a love story. This is a mystery. This is a horror novel. This is a sci-fi novel. This has some fantasy elements. This is, I think, King's second best book of all time. But it's not his first, so it's not on my top 10. All right, guys, so it is time for the top 10. And the first one is one that really changed how I viewed horror books. Now, I've read horror for a long time, but I had not read anything like this until I read number 10 and that is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. If you have never read Stephen Graham Jones, one of the hardest things to do when you describe to someone what Stephen Graham Jones does well is that every book he writes is so different. His ability to switch voices and to change styles is amazing within the horror genre. Now, The Only Good Indians was the first book that I read by him, and I was floored. It's complicated, it's messy, it's complex. It takes huge swings at weird things and weird attempts at subverting the horror genre, but then also lifting up the classic vibes that made me love horror. And I think that The Only Good Indians is in my top 10 because it changed how I viewed what you could do in a horror novel. It changed how I viewed just the swings you could take at the horror genre while still hitting all the beats and while being unique in your own voice. If you've never read The Only Good Indians, I would not be put off by the reviews. There's some reviews that hate it, and you're either going to hate or love this book, and you're probably either going to hate or love Stephen Graham Jones as an author in general. But what's interesting is if you don't like this book, he probably has a book that feels significantly different, and you can try again there. But I think The Only Good Indians is such an interesting look at death and at regret and at friendship and at loss and mourning and all of these different topics that are common to horror, but through a lens that is wholly unique and only Stephen Graham Jones could pull off. Go check out The Only Good Indians, my number 10. Next up, at number 9, we've got The Fisherman by John Langan. This horror novel blends cosmic elements with this slice of life story about two men who are fishing, and they're talking about stories of their past, and they're talking about stories that exist within this place, this community that they're fishing in, and then it turns into an epic cosmic horror fantasy story built within the main story about the two men fishing, and it could not be better. The jarring nature of the two different narratives actually functions to make the book stand out, in my opinion. John Langan's writing is beautiful and haunting, and the pictures that he paints are insanely epic, but at the same time, you enjoy being in the boat with two men fishing, even though the middle of the book is this huge, sprawling, epic cosmic horror. At the same time, the beginning of the book, where you're just with these men, living life with them, is just as beautiful and just as haunting in some ways. If you've never read The Fisherman by John Langan, and you like horror or fantasy or just books that are written beautifully, this book knocks it out of the park. Number 9, The Fisherman by John Langan. Next up, at number 8, we have a classic that I actually DNF'd the first time that I tried to read it, and that is Something Wicked This Way Comes by Ray Bradbury. Yeah, my grandma told me to read this. She thought I would like it, and I bounced hard off of the prose. I was not ready for it. I had read Fahrenheit 451 in school and enjoyed it, but I was not reading literary fiction at all at this time, and it just didn't click for me. It wasn't the right time, but I came back to it, and it became one of my favorite books of all time. You'll realize in this list that I am a sucker for coming of age, and this blends horror and coming of age and questions of growing up and questions of getting old and questions of what would you do to prolong your life? What would you do to try to find purpose in a way that was just wholly unique, surrounding this circus that comes to town and has this dark element to it, and there's something wrong, and the kids just know that something is wrong, and they get tangled up in what's happening in this carnival. And man, I'm telling you, this book is brilliant. The character work is perfection, and the prose, if you're ready for it, is beautiful and doesn't actually read that difficult. You just have to kind of prepare yourself for the purple nature of Ray Bradbury's descriptions. And I think that they're actually juxtaposed really well by the simple conversations that the two boys have that are the main characters in the book. But man, this just hit right that second time and reminds me that sometimes it's not the right time to read a book and you may need to come back to it, because now this is on my top 10 and one of my favorite books of all time. If you haven't checked out Something Wicked This Way Comes, it is a classic for a reason. It is one of the greatest coming of age stories of all time for a reason. Check it out. Number 8, Something Wicked This Way Comes. At number 7, we have a book that I still remember the moment I finished it. I remember where I was, I remember how I felt, I remember my surroundings, I remember what my wife said when she looked over and saw me crying in the chair at the beach, and that is Ordinary Grace by William Kent Kruger, one of the most emotionally jarring books I have ever read. It is a mystery novel set in 1960s Minnesota, and I'm not from the 60s, but I still felt so much connection to the community and to the culture that was in this story. But most importantly, I connected with the main character's family because the father of the main boy in this novel is a pastor, and he's engaging and dealing with what it looks like to be faithful to his job and to Jesus while also being a good father and a good husband. He has people in his family who are having doubts, and then a murder in the town shakes everything up, and you're following this family, how they're going to respond, and also trying to figure out who did it. It's such a beautiful blend of this coming of age novel, of engaging with some themes that are absolutely poignant around faith and around doubt and around death, while also just giving us a fantastic murder mystery that is not surprising because it's what William Kent Kruger does best. If you've never read this book, whether you're religious or not, you're probably going to cry. You're probably going to struggle through some of the most tense scenes, not because it's difficult to read, but because it's making you feel and deal with some things that are really hard. You got to pick up my number 7, Ordinary Grace by William Kent Kruger. Next up, number 6, a book that I just recently finished in January. And some of you are going to say, hey, this doesn't belong on the list because it's technically part of a series. I understand that there's other books in the series, but I think a lot of people would agree with me that this reads like, feels like, and can be treated as a full standalone. And that is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, probably one of the best character studies that I've ever read in a book, probably one of the best slow burns that I have ever taken in. Every moment of this book was absolutely haunting, was gorgeous, and made me think and made me engage with these characters in a way that I hadn't in a hot minute. This book has the hype for a reason. Everything people say about it is 100% true, and I'm not really a Westerns guy, and I do struggle sometimes with things that are slower and more literary and enjoying them, but at no point did I feel like this was not an absolute banger. I mean, it's on my top 10 list, and it knocks some books off in order to get there, and then hops some books that I have loved for years. And I'm going to continue to talk about this book for a long time. And don't get in the comments and remind me that it's not a standalone. I know that it's technically not a standalone, but this is my list and these are my rules, and this book stands alone, and so it's going to be on this list. But number 6, Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove. You got to check it out. The hype is real. Number 6 is a book that I think is going to end up as a modern classic. I think people are going to be talking about it and reading it for a very long time, and that's because it is unique. It is because it's digestible in an impressive way, given how literary it is, and that is Piranesi by Susanna Clark. Piranesi by Susanna Clark is as good as people hype it up to be. We were talking about this in the Discord recently, that there's almost zero negative conversation around this book, and it's not because people aren't being honest. I really do think that it's just one of the best books that has been written in the modern era. It is short, but it is poignant. It has so much to say in so few pages. And the main character just oozes this relatability and oozes this desire for you to see the best come from him, even though you don't know much about him and he doesn't know much about himself. And he's in this mysterious place that just causes awe and wonder and makes you ask questions that you want the answers to. And next thing you know, the book is over and a lot of questions have been answered and some questions haven't, but the book just nails exactly what it wants. And I think Piranesi by Susanna Clark only gets better the second time you read it. It's one of the few books on this list that I have reread, and it was even better the second time. If you have not read Piranesi by Susanna Clark, do it. It's number 5 on my list for a reason. Next up at number 4 is a book that I think should be required reading for every teenager ever. And that's because every teenager ever is going to have to deal with death and loss and that question of what is the purpose of life and what do we do in the midst of loss of those that we loved. And that is A Monster Calls by Patrick Ness. This is the most emotional book, I think, on this list. It is a book that destroyed me in all of the best ways. It is a book that engages with some heavy themes in a package that almost feels like it's a middle grade read, but at the same time, it engages them in a way that leaves adults crying in their rooms. I've handed this to so many people who have read it that read different types of books. They read fantasy, they read horror, they read sci-fi, they read literary fiction, they read only adult stuff, or they read everything in between. And I've never had someone read this and not say that it was one of the most impactful things that they have ever experienced. This book would be number one for me, I think, if it was a little bit bigger, if it was a little bit more adult feeling. And so it's 4 on my list, but probably number 1 in terms of emotional impact. And it is something that I think every human should read, deal with, and think about and consume so that they have to go through what I went through when I read A Monster Calls. Number 4, you need to check it out. Next up at number 3, we have the book that surprised me last year. I knew that it was a well-written novel and I knew people praised it for a reason, but I did not know just what it would do to me. And that is Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. This book decided to destroy my life. This book deals with generational trauma and generational addiction, and that is something that is near and dear to my life experience. This book puts you in the shoes of a boy growing up in the midst of generational addiction and generational trauma in the same state that I live in. And a lot of the things that he's going through, I see even in my community that I minister to as a pastor. I've felt it in the life that I have lived in my family circumstances. And this book takes all of that and it does not pull any punches. It makes you feel things. One of the things that this book did to me that I had never experienced before was I was genuinely angry at the book. There was a moment where I almost put it down for a while because the characters were frustrating me so much because they were so realistic and they were making such real choices that reminded me of things I've seen in my ministry, things I've seen in my own family. And I was so frustrated with everyone in the book. But that's what the author wants in this book. The author wants you to recognize and deal with and reckon with what is going on in our world that allows for things like this to be relatable. And really, this book all was going to come down to how she ended it, what she wanted to say with the ending. And all I have to say is that the ending is perfect. This went from a book I was liking and had respect for to a top 10 book of all time for me because of the ending and because of what she decided to do with our main character and because of how she decided to land the plane thematically. It was one of the best things I have ever read. And it's not in my wheelhouse in terms of genre, but it was just that good, especially if you are somebody who's engaged with or is engaging with those who suffer from generational trauma, have generational addiction in their lives. This book is a must read. It is something I think that every minister should read because as they deal with this in their communities, they need to have empathy for those families and understand where the people in them are coming from and what systemic issues are putting those things in their lives. And this book does a great job of engaging with that. And that's why it's number 3 on my list, Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. And next up at number 2, he's finally here on the list, and that is Stephen King's The Green Mile. Now, I go back and forth on what my favorite King is, like we talked about earlier, but I think I'm landing the plane here that The Green Mile is the best of Stephen King. See, I like Stephen King's horror, but I think what he actually does the best is his slice of life, is his drama, is his character work, and almost a magical realism setting. And the definition of that is The Green Mile. A lot of people, I think, haven't read this book because they've watched the movie and they just assume, right, that they know the story. It doesn't matter. I watched the movie before I read the book and I still was floored. It is perfection. It is written perfectly. The prose is astounding. The characters are immaculate. The story is paced perfectly. There's literally nothing I could say negative about this book. If you loved the movie, you need to experience the book. If you love the book, you need to experience the movie, but who hasn't watched the movie at this point? But I think that this is the best of what Stephen King does. I wish we had more books that lean into this than some of the schlocky horror from the 80s and 90s, but that's okay. I love a lot of that as well, but I think that this is the best thing that Stephen King can do, engaging with the human condition, engaging with what it looks like when magic and when the supernatural may be creeping into real mundane life and dealing with that question and dealing with the things that King deals with, like the justice system in this book, and like what it means to be guilty and what it means to give yourself for someone. I mean, at the end of the day, John Coffey in this book, his initials are JC, and he's very reminiscent of someone that means a lot to me. And I think that that is purposeful. And so Stephen King's The Green Mile, the second best standalone that I've ever read. And last but not least, The GOAT, the best standalone novel that I have ever read. And if you've watched this channel, you know the answer to this question is and will forever be Boy's Life by Robert McCammon. I am a sucker for coming of age. And I am such a sucker for coming of age that when I read this book, I was immediately floored. I was immediately telling everyone they needed to read it because the things I love about coming of age are done to perfection in this book. I love It by Stephen King, but there's plenty of issues in that book that temper my love for that coming of age story. Summer of Night by Dan Simmons is another great one that deals with coming of age, but has some major issues. I think that the best example of how to do coming of age exists in Boy's Life. This story engages the concept of, man, what about our memories? What about how we have built our lives on the things we believed happened when we were kids, and whether or not we know if they actually did, and how memory serves to engage us as adults, but also how we lose the wonder in our lives as we become these pessimistic, craggy adults who are paying bills and are doing 9 to 5. We've forgotten what it means to live with joy. And Boy's Life does such a great job of engaging all of those themes, but also just presenting us with a beautiful mystery story, presenting us with a poignant conversation around what it means to be a young person in a time where racism was a huge deal. And those themes all weave into this greater question about growing up and about our lives and about how much we are changed by what we believe occurred in our childhood, and just how much it matters that we look fondly upon the good moments of our lives when we were children, and just how much it matters that we learn from the bad moments so that we don't repeat the mistakes of those who came before us. Boy's Life is, in my opinion, the greatest standalone novel ever written, and actually my favorite book of all time. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. I hope it does, because that means I read an even better book. But I think Boy's Life is just the pinnacle of what I love about novels. I would love to know in the comments, what are your favorite standalones of all time? Have you read some of the books on this list? If you are not a member of my Patreon yet, we have 3 tiers. We have a free tier, we have 2 paid tiers, and we have a lot of different things that you receive from that extra on top of just this channel. Even at the free tiers, voting on my Patreon read, seeing some extra content, weekly reading updates for the paid tiers, access to my writing. I'm currently writing a horror story that I'm really enjoying, and I would love for you to check out my work in progress over there on my Patreon. You can find the details for that down in the description. If you have not joined the Book Street Boys Discord, it's an awesome community that we have created around reading books and writing books and creating content that is just such a cool place. We've been at it for a year, and we have almost 400 members, and it's one of the coolest communities on the internet for reading books, for writing books, for engaging with book content, and really just enjoying time with people who read books like you do. I think you should go check it out. If you haven't, the link is down in the description. Thank you guys so much for coming and hanging out in this video. I hope you enjoyed my top 10 standalones of all time. Make sure you like and subscribe and support this video in any way you can by leaving a comment. Any comments or engagement with the likes on this video help the algorithm to decide that I don't suck at this. And so thank you so much for all your support. Make sure you check out Patreon, check out the Book Street Boys Discord. Thank you guys for all the support you've given me on this channel. I'm excited to see you in the next one.